we could
Over
gain
to Anna
some minutes.
Montalbán now.
We'll hear Anna
Technical
Montalbán,
Secretary for the Walking
Secretary
Cities
for Networks
Network.
for
Thank
Walking
you.
Cities. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Can you hear me properly? Yes, thank you. I would have loved to be there face to face, but it was impossible for me. I thank you for the invitation. I thank the organizers. And for those of you who do not know us, Walking Cities is a non-profit organization comprehended Spanish towns. We're more than 60 towns already on board, and we try to open the public space for people, for walkers, so that we can have this recovery of public spaces for people rather than for vehicles. Obviously, this is the goal that we keep in mind that unites us as towns and cities. The concept of low emission zones was something we were really craving for. We do need that umbrella at the national level, which can be compared to the anti-smoking law, anti-smoking acts in Spain. It would have been very difficult to dispose of that very bad habit of smoking in public places if the towns and the nation had not been brave enough to implement such an act, such a measure. So we think that low emission zones are quite similar. It's something desirable, and we held high expectations around this topic. So this has originated from the Climate Change Act, and because of that, the focus has been on changing one type of vehicles for another type of vehicles with lower emissions. Article 14.3 refers to the fact that depending on the environmental level defined by the General Director of Traffic, the measure will be adapted to each case. So we think that we've missed an opportunity because we are focusing just on a certain type of mobility, namely the electric mobility, and we haven't seized the opportunity of a more holistic approach, focusing on the public space for all. So if we restrict mobility depending on the type of vehicle, of car, it's very probable that sooner or later all cars will abide by the environmental rules. So we will not be able to incorporate other roles and uses for the public space and the streets. That's why in our claims and statements, allegations that we presented, we incorporated other views. We see that there are recommendations, but no obligations. We think it's very positive that the focus is on the modal shift, and also that there's reference to the WHO guidelines and values. But same as we need to take into account noise, public space per se has not been considered. We think there's room for improvement, for more work. For example, there are not compulsory measures, for example, related to goal 3, namely active mobility and recovery of public space. In this sense, we think it would be very interesting to incorporate a new goal, namely the obligation to achieve a specific goal for the recovery of public spaces that would implement restrictions to the use of vehicles. Nowadays, we've got 75% of our streets occupied by vehicles, no matter which type of car, whereas the remaining 25% of the public space is for pedestrians or for users of the street, for example, people who want to play, demonstrate, gather in the public space, which is what makes cities what they are, or towns what they are. We think that taking into account this percentage, it would be interesting to set a goal, namely in 10 years' time to revert this trend, namely 75% of public space for people and 25% of public spaces in cities for vehicles. This goal could be quantified according to a certain magnitude, namely the percentage representing the ratio between pedestrian space and vehicle space. There we could include sidewalks or pedestrianized areas, and streets could have different priorities. For example, the bare minimum of cars could be admitted, but the priority would be for vehicles. Of course, deliveries would be allowed, services for hotels, restricted mobility people. So if guidelines are to become a royal decree, so that we go beyond the recommendation stage, we think that we should pursue this goal, namely promoting active modes and the recovery of public space for other uses. And this could be quantified by means of this ratio between public space and space for vehicles. And this could be measured specifically, and restrictions in that case would be much more effective when improving other aspects related to the public space and related to air quality. So, just summing up, we believe that it is not enough to promote just recommendations, but rather that we need to restrict effectively the access of cars to our public spaces, because that detracts from our capacity as pedestrians to use public spaces, because cars are also machines that are able to kill even. And we think that was a missed opportunity when establishing low emission zones. We also think it is negative to talk about two elements, namely traffic signs, signals could be adapted to the type of vehicle. For example, if we want to talk about active users of public spaces, we do not incorporate these elements into the new situation. We just change one type of vehicle for another type of vehicle, as I was saying. And then regarding parking spaces, real restrictions for parking vehicles would be an effective measure. We also think that measures encouraging the use of private cars, no matter their type, is not positive, because there's public transport for that. So it would be quite interesting to do that, because a car can be very electric and very non-pollutant, but that doesn't mean that I'm entitled to use it to get to the center of a town for a very short trip, or if I'm just going through the city. I might not be polluting, and that's also debatable. We could incorporate other elements related to pollution, such as the manufacturing process, but it's an unnecessary trip it's a distorting element as well to allow those cars to enter the city. And that runs against the desire of many old people who would like to enjoy the street a little bit more. They are afraid of being run over. Children would like to use the street to play. And I think this is just food for thought for our debate. And that was all. Thank you very much, Anna. We thank you all for your contributions. We've got 10 minutes still so that we can have a little debate. I think many interesting ideas were put on the table. And now that we've got Marta here, several panelists mentioned the question or the need for a royal decree so that towns and cities will be forced to do things so that they would need to align among themselves. And the goal for low emission zones are a modal transfer from polluting solutions to non-polluting solutions, public transport, active mobility, and not using the car, no matter how ecological or environmentally friendly the car might be. So one important aspect in that respect is size. We need to have a shift to another type of mobility. Not that we might have a small low emission zone that will just make the driver to go to another zone which is bigger and where he or she can drive with no worries. So as Christian was saying, how would you consider the possibility of having this situation, namely little towns making cosmetic changes and having very reduced, very small low emission zones that do not really contribute to a change? Yes, Carlos, I think that's a very interesting point. It's something we've reflected on when preparing the guidelines. In the guidelines, we mentioned air quality. Improving air quality is what you are saying, I think, yes, reducing CO2 emissions. But regarding monitoring air quality, I think things are quite clearer in that respect because we indicate that we need a real, clear improvement of air quality. And that improvement should be registered in the meters, the air quality meters, because otherwise those meters are not going to show any improvement in air quality. On the other hand, how we design those air quality meters needs to be quite representative so that we can identify the problem. So that data are representative of the situation. So we've got a factor or some measuring factor for air quality in air quality meters, then we will not be missing the point. The improvement will be registered, if any, and monitoring will be carried out properly with an indicator, a clear indicator. Same applies to climate change. We suggest indicators where CO2 emission meters can be registered accordingly. And also the implementation process requires a prior diagnosis process so that we can have a benchmark in order to verify whether there has been an improvement or not. Regarding air quality, there's a need to show the real improvement in air quality. In the case of CO2 emissions, we need to have an inventory of fleet of cars that are quite pollutant, so that we can see whether there has been an improvement as well. We, as to the fact that we should be working on a royal decree rather than on recommendations, we would have to be very clear about the essential elements that we would need to incorporate, namely goals, measuring of those goals, and monitoring mechanisms. We are working sequentially on that. We started with these guidelines. That's a starting point. This has generated quite a heated debate, a very enriching one. And once we've got our guidelines ready, we'll see which elements are essential before taking the next step, namely the royal decree. That would be the idea, more or less. So if any of the other panelists wants to say something? Okay, do you want to say something? Okay, so first Christian, then Pilar. Yes, says Christian. I would like just to make a brief comment. Our lobbying for a new decree could be also justified with a specific example. You say that one criterion to evaluate the efficiency of low emission zones is the measurings carried out by air quality meters and also monitoring stations. So, for example, at Plaza de Elíptica in southern Madrid, there we've got a station for measuring. Will have good results at the square, at the Plaza Elíptica square, but around that square, we will be transferring the problem to those surrounding areas. So we need to make those guidelines obligatory, compulsory, because that happens in Madrid, but that can also happen elsewhere. Yes, I could add another topic, which is also considered within the guidelines for air quality. You mentioned a low emission zone that can improve measuring in a very specific point, a very specific square, but the fact that surrounding areas might show worse results. Well, we've established that the value of a specific station will be considered as the worst of the values. Namely, we will just consider the worst of the values of the measuring. So the value of the whole zone will be the worst value of the whole area, namely the highest value. Very well. I'm Pilar Vega from G21, and it was a shame not to be able to hear Ana Montalbán because the sound was not too good and she was very quick, but it was very interesting what she was mentioning. So we need to go for a specific design of towns and cities so that cars are avoidable. I've read all the documents and I've made my statements and my claims, and I see that in those guidelines there's still a huge space for cars. If we are going for a modal shift, we need to go for a cultural shift to promote a different cultural model. But the current policy of our government is to promote again the automobile industry, the working population has mobility needs, etc. But I would like to ask Marta something about something she said. She pointed out that the idea of the guidelines is to adapt to the guidelines of the World Health Organization regarding air quality. Well, in that respect, WHO guidelines are even more restrictive than the previous ones, which were, in their turn, even more restrictive than the European Union ones. So what is the Spanish government going to do when we've got regions or cities such as Madrid that ignore those guidelines? We need to make sure that those guidelines are implemented, because it's all very nice to write something on paper, but another topic is to make that implemented, because I endorse the implementation of the WHO guidelines, but I don't know how the ministry or the government is going to do that. Yes, your question is very relevant. I'm going to answer your two questions. So you see that we continue prioritizing private transport? Well, I'll tell you that that is not our intention at all. And we'll read your statement very attentively, because if that's your perception, we really don't want your perception to be that. We really go for public transport, active citizens, active mobility, but we will read your statement and claim, and we'll try to make our intention very clear. And regarding WHO guidelines, well, what do we want to do with that? Well, the European Commission, the zero pollution scheme was presented, and the goal there is to approach WHO guidelines as much as possible. The European Commission has announced a new revision of air quality guidelines, so we're waiting for a new proposal, a new suggestion. So making WHO guidelines compulsory, that's an issue. You saw in our maps that we are not even approaching WHO objectives or goals. So we want the WHO to suggest new values for air quality, and the same applies to the European Commission. And after that, we'll start legislating. We could be even more ambitious than the European Commission, but first of all, we want to see what the Commission's proposal is. The World Health Organization, in a press note commenting on those guidelines, saying that, yes, we want to go beyond that, but we've seen that the different countries, are not even reaching our 2005 goals. So they think that we could go for an intermediate goal before approaching the 2021 values. So it is quite probable or likely that the European Commission will present a new proposal with intermediate values, and the working groups of the different member states will analyze that proposition, and we'll see how that goes. So we're waiting for those European Union guidelines, how they go about the issue, but we're talking about intermediate values. Thank you very much. We've got two more questions. First of all, we've got Ana Montalbán with some comment.
Muy bien, según dice Pilar. Bueno, yo simplemente quería decirle a Marta que si tiene.
Yes, I'm sorry. You struggled to understand what I was saying. I apologize. Anyway, right now it is true that citizens seem to prefer to continue using private vehicles. And we all know that regarding the mobility pyramid, we've been talking about it for 30 years and nothing has been done. Unless we do something practical right now, 30 more years will go by. I have a question that I'd like to bring to the table. What will happen to cities that won't achieve the minimum air quality requirements? Would we be looking at sanctions, perhaps fines, or something else?
¿Puedes repetir la pregunta, Ana?
Anna, can you ask your question again, please? Yes. My question is, what will happen to cities that do not comply with minimum air quality requirements? Oh, right. She's wondering if maybe fines will be issued. Okay. Our guidelines do not include a sanction system, really. We'll be looking into it, and of course, we'll be trying to incorporate a sanction system, but as of right now, we do not have one. Okay, Anna, I don't know if you want to comment on that. Yes, I do understand that guidelines cannot be used to issue fines, but I was just wondering if maybe you were thinking to issue fines for cities that do not comply with minimum air quality requirements. Okay. Our improvement goals do not include any sanctions, not even at a European level. The directive itself, in theory, should be compulsory, but it is still at a very early stage of development. Cities have been fined before, but in cities in Italy, Germany, and France, but not because air quality hasn't improved. It's because quotas have been exceeded anyway. They have appealed to the European Court, so the system is not well defined yet. I suppose the issue is that regulatory requirements within the EU aren't in line with WHO requirements, and there's still more work to be done at a European level. It's as easy as that. Anyway, the main issue in cities is the exceeding of allotted quotas for emissions, for example, in Madrid or Barcelona. But regarding fines and sanctions, nothing has been done yet. Okay, we have two questions from our viewers on Zoom. Marco Garrido says, there are certain means of transport, such as skates or electric bikes, whose use is currently peaking, but they could also pose a threat for pedestrians, for example. So what do you think about using these means of transport within low emission zones? What is your position with regards to that, Christian? Okay, I would say that cities are more than competent enough to regulate the use of this personal mobility vehicles. Some of these companies as far as we know, let me back up. So as of right now, these skates or electric bikes can be parked anywhere in the city, but soon specific parking lots for these will be created. In the case of non-electric bicycles or non-electric skates. Sorry, in the case of electric vehicles, I think there will be mandated to use bike lanes, pretty much like non-electric bicycles and skates. That should make it safer. It would still encourage people not to use their private vehicles, but not pose a threat to pedestrians within low emission zones. Thank you very much